Vanessa Langley adjusted the sleek collar of her tailored black suit as she stepped out of her car. The courthouse loomed before her, its grand marble pillars shimmering under the morning sun. To most, it was an intimidating structure, a fortress of justice. To Vanessa, it was home. She had dedicated her life to fighting for truth within those walls, becoming one of the youngest and most respected judges in the state. Her journey had not been easy. A black woman presiding over high-profile cases in a system built to challenge her at every turn was a testament to her resilience. But Vanessa didn't just survive. She thrived. She clutched her leather briefcase and strode toward the courthouse steps, her heels clicking rhythmically against the stone pavement. Heads turned as she passed. Some offered friendly nods, others averted their eyes with discomfort or resentment. Vanessa was used to both. Her firm rulings against corrupt officials and discriminatory practices had earned her equal parts admiration and animosity. As she approached the courthouse entrance, two white officers stood in her path, their expressions cold and unfriendly. They were both broad-shouldered, clad in dark uniforms that seemed tailored to amplify their authority. Vanessa's brow furrowed slightly. She recognized them. Officer Grant and Officer Lewis, two men whose names had surfaced repeatedly in complaints filed by marginalized communities, complaints that had mysteriously vanished from the system. "Morning, gentlemen," Vanessa said, her voice calm but commanding. "Identification." Officer Grant barked, his voice sharp and dismissive. Vanessa arched an eyebrow. "You know who I am." "Rules are rules." Officer Lewis chimed in with a smirk. "No exceptions." Vanessa calmly reached into her briefcase and produced her ID, holding it out for them to see. Officer Grant snatched it from her hand with unnecessary force, glancing at it as though it were nothing more than a piece of scrap paper. "Forgery is a serious offense, Mom," Grant said, the sarcasm in his tone dripping like acid. "You'll need to wait while we verify this." "This is absurd," Vanessa replied, her patience waning. "You're obstructing a judge from entering her own courthouse." "Your courthouse." Officer Lewis laughed, his voice echoing through the hallway. "Last time I checked, this place belongs to the city, not you." People were gathering now, their whispers filling the air like static. Phones were coming out, cameras pointed at the escalating confrontation. Vanessa could feel their eyes on her, but she kept her composure. Her reputation had been built on her ability to remain poised under pressure. This situation was no different. "I have cases scheduled today, important cases that need my attention. Now, are you going to let me do my job, or are you going to continue making a spectacle of yourselves?" Vanessa's gaze was unflinching as it bore into the officers. Grant's grip on her ID tightened. "I don't think you understand. We're not here for your convenience. We're here for security, and something about you just doesn't sit right with us." Rage simmered beneath Vanessa's calm exterior. This wasn't about security. It was about power. The kind wielded by men who couldn't stomach the idea of a black woman holding authority over them. Men who thrived on intimidation and control. Before she could respond, Grant reached out and grabbed her wrist. The suddenness of it jolted her, but she didn't flinch. His hand was rough and forceful, his grip bruising. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Let go of me," Vanessa ordered, her voice low and lethal. Lewis took a step closer, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Maybe you should learn some respect before you go handing out orders." "Respect," Vanessa replied, her voice steady. "I've earned more respect than you could ever comprehend. And the fact that you can't see that is your own failing, not mine." "Bold words," Grant sneered. "Let's see if you're still talking tough when you're dragged out of here in cuffs." The crowd's murmuring grew louder, anger and outrage mixing with curiosity. Some people shouted words of support, others recorded the scene with fervent intensity. Vanessa's eyes flickered toward the doors of the courthouse, where more security personnel had gathered, their faces blank with indifference. No one dared to intervene. "Morrison's got the whole place under his thumb," Vanessa thought bitterly. Judge Morrison, A man who held influence over the entire judicial system, like a puppeteer pulling strings. His corruption was notorious, his alliances with dirty cops and crooked politicians an open secret. Vanessa had been building a case against him for months, and she was beginning to understand just how deep his reach extended. Enough of this nonsense. Vanessa's voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a blade. Release me now or face the consequences of obstructing a judge on duty. Grant's eyes narrowed, his mouth twitching with a smugness that made her stomach churn. You think you're some kind of untouchable. Your title means nothing to us. You're just another arrogant suit who thinks she's better than everyone else. Vanessa inhaled deeply, her mind racing through her options. These men weren't just trying to intimidate her. They were trying to humiliate her, to break her spirit in front of everyone watching. They wanted her to submit, to show weakness. But Vanessa Langley had not clawed her way to the top of the legal system to bow down to bullies, especially not ones who abused their power under the guise of authority. I've had enough of this. Vanessa's voice was ice cold, her words sharp and clear. By preventing me from entering the courthouse, you are violating the law. This incident will be reported, and you will be held accountable. Grant's smile widened, his fingers tightening around her wrist. Good luck with that. You're all alone here. Nobody's coming to help you. Just then, the heavy courtroom doors swung open. A voice boomed from inside, one filled with authority and anger. Let her go. Now. The crowd fell silent, eyes shifting from the officers to the tall figure emerging from the entrance. Chief Magistrate Harold Klein, a man known for his integrity and adherence to the law. His face was red with fury, his gaze locked on the two officers still clutching Vanessa's wrist. Grant and Lewis hesitated, uncertainty flashing across their faces. For the first time, Vanessa saw the cracks in their arrogance. She yanked her wrist free from Grant's grip, rubbing the sore spot as she met his eyes with a glare that could shatter glass. This isn't over, Grant growled, but the quiver in his voice betrayed his fear. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice steady and powerful. You're right. This is far from over, and I intend to see it through to the very end. The battle was just beginning, but Vanessa Langley had no intention of backing down. Vanessa walked through the courthouse halls, her wrists still aching from Officer Grant's ruthless grip. The bruises on her skin were nothing compared to the wounds festering beneath the surface, wounds made raw by injustice, arrogance, and unchecked authority. Her mind churned with anger, but she refused to let it overwhelm her. Anger was a weapon best wielded with precision, and Vanessa had learned how to sharpen hers to a deadly point. Chief Magistrate Klein had escorted her to her chambers himself, his features twisted with concern and embarrassment. For him, the incident was a blemish on the courthouse's integrity. For Vanessa, it was a reminder of how far corruption spread through the veins of the very system she fought to protect. Vanessa, I'm deeply sorry for what happened back there, Klein said, his voice tight with frustration as he closed her chamber door behind him. Those men had no right to treat you that way. Rest assured, they'll be dealt with. Vanessa's eyes met his, searching for sincerity. Klein was one of the few men she trusted within these walls. His reputation for fairness and accountability was the reason she had accepted his mentorship years ago. But Vanessa knew even good men had limits, especially when the rot ran so deep. Thank you, Harold, but we both know dealing with them won't be enough. Vanessa replied, her voice steady. They're just puppets. The real problem is the man pulling the strings. Morrison, Klein muttered bitterly, his lips curling with distaste. You think he orchestrated this? I don't think. I know. Vanessa's hands clenched into fists at her sides. He's been gunning for me ever since I started digging into those wrongful convictions. Too many innocent people locked away, too many dirty deals swept under the rug, and I'm getting too close to unraveling them. Klein nodded slowly, his gaze distant. You've made a lot of enemies, Vanessa. Powerful ones. Enemies who hide behind a law they claim to uphold. I won't let them destroy what I've worked for. Her words were ironclad, her resolve unbreakable. Klein sighed and shook his head. "You're going to need allies, Vanessa. More than just me. Morrison's reach is wider than you think." "Then I'll find allies. Whatever it takes," she replied without hesitation. "Because I refuse to be silenced." Klein's eyes softened with admiration. "I believe you. Just be careful. Men like Morrison don't play fair. And the more desperate they become, the more dangerous they get." "Let them try," Vanessa said, her chin lifting defiantly. "I'm ready." By the time Klein left her chambers, Vanessa was already drafting her plan. Every case Morrison had touched, every officer under his thumb, every falsified record, she would uncover it all. But first, she needed to regroup, regain her strength. Today's encounter with Grant and Lewis was more than just intimidation. It was a declaration of war. And Vanessa had never been one to shy away from battle. The following day, Vanessa arrived at the courthouse with her head held high. The bruises on her wrist were hidden beneath a silk blouse, but the fire in her eyes was on full display. This time, she made sure to record her walk from her car to the entrance. If they tried anything again, the evidence would be irrefutable. But to her surprise, the path was clear. The officers who had harassed her were nowhere to be seen. Instead, another officer, one she didn't recognize, stood guard by the entrance, his posture stiff and professional. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said, his tone respectful. "Morning," Vanessa replied, her suspicion lacing her words. As she passed him, she caught the hint of something else in his gaze. Fear. Morrison's tactics had rattled more than just her. His reign of terror had spread like a disease, infecting even those who tried to remain neutral. Vanessa spent the morning reviewing cases, her mind drifting back to the previous day's encounter more often than she liked. She scoured her files, searching for any connections between Morrison's network and the police department. And she found them. Thin threads woven through case files, shared bank accounts, and dubious legal decisions. It was a tangled web, but Vanessa had a gift for untangling the truth. The more she uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Morrison was funneling money through intermediaries, rewarding officers who carried out his orders, and punishing those who dared to defy him. Grant and Lewis were just his latest pawns, sent to intimidate her into submission. But Vanessa wasn't just anyone, and she wasn't going down without a fight. She picked up her phone and made the call she had been dreading. A number she hadn't dialed in years, not since her previous career as a federal prosecutor. But desperate times called for desperate measures. "Agent Peters," came the gruff voice on the other end. "Thomas, it's Vanessa Langley," she said, her tone unwavering. "I need your help." There was a brief pause. "Well, damn. Haven't heard that voice in ages. What's the occasion?" "Looking to get back in the game." "I never left the game," Vanessa replied coolly. "I just changed the rules." "Sounds like you're about to stir up trouble. What's going on?" His voice held a hint of curiosity, tinged with a familiarity that made her remember just how formidable they'd been as a team. "I've got a judge using his power to destroy innocent lives, and he's using dirty cops to do his dirty work. I need access to files, connections, everything you've got on Judge Morrison." "Morrison?" Thomas's voice turned serious. "I've heard whispers about him, but no one's ever been able to make anything stick. If you're going after him, you'd better be prepared for war." "I am. I just need the ammunition. I can get you what you need. But if Morrison's as powerful as you say, this won't be a clean fight. Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I was born ready." Vanessa's voice was a razor's edge. "And I'm done playing by his rules." "All right. I'll be in touch," Thomas said. "And Vanessa, watch your back." She ended the call, her heartbeat thrumming with adrenaline. Help was coming. And with it, the truth that Morrison had spent years trying to bury. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming against her desk. The game was on, and she was about to change everything. Vanessa's days became a blur of late nights, phone calls, and sleepless determination. The files Thomas sent over were overwhelming, a labyrinth of corruption spanning years. But for Vanessa, they were a lifeline. Each document she uncovered was another piece of the puzzle, another thread she could unravel to bring Morrison's empire crashing down. Stacks of papers covered her desk, each marked with sticky notes and highlighted passages. Patterns emerged as she meticulously cross-referenced dates, names, and case files. Grant and Lewis were just two of many officers who had received payouts from entities tied to Morrison's network. Cases had been buried, evidence tampered with, witnesses intimidated into silence. The sickening truth was that the corruption went deeper than she'd feared. Yet Vanessa thrived under the pressure. The anger she harbored from the humiliating encounter in the courthouse had transformed into a relentless driving force, and it pushed her beyond the point of exhaustion. Her phone buzzed on the desk, the vibration rattling against her coffee mug. Thomas's name flashed on the screen. "Thomas, what do you have for me?" Vanessa said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Plenty. And none of it's good," he replied, his voice heavy. "I dug into Morrison's finances, offshore accounts, shell companies, you name it. He's got his hands in everything from real estate to private prisons. The man's making money off keeping people locked up, and he's willing to crush anyone who gets in his way. Anything that can tie him directly to the cops on his payroll." Vanessa's fingers clenched around the pen in her hand, the metal clip digging into her palm. Some transactions link back to officers Grant and Lewis. Looks like Morrison's been rewarding them with hefty bonuses for their services, and those two aren't the only ones. There's a list of cops who've been benefiting from his dirty money. You expose this, and you could take down half the department. I don't just want half the department. I want the whole operation dismantled. Morrison, his allies, his cronies. I want them all. Ambitious, but that's why I always liked working with you." Thomas's voice softened, a hint of nostalgia creeping in. "But you've got to be careful. Morrison's not just going to sit back and let you tear down his empire. He's probably already trying to figure out how to bury you. Let him try." Vanessa's voice was cool, steady. "The more he pushes, the harder I'll push back." "That's what I'm afraid of," Thomas admitted. "I'm sending you everything I have. But once you start moving with this, you're going to be a target. Wouldn't be the first time." Thomas chuckled darkly. "You always were fearless. Just make sure your confidence doesn't get you killed." Vanessa ended the call and glanced at her computer screen. Files loaded one by one, a seemingly endless supply of evidence detailing the horrors Morrison had inflicted on the lives of innocent people. Families torn apart, futures destroyed, all for the sake of power and greed. Her eyes narrowed as she clicked through the documents, her focus razor-sharp. The pieces were there. Now she just needed to put them together. 3 nights later, Vanessa found herself standing outside a dimly lit bar on the rougher side of town. Thomas had insisted that their meeting be in person this time, away from prying eyes and ears. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, bracing herself against the chill of the night air. The bar was a dive, its cracked windows smeared with years of grime and neglect. The patrons inside looked like they belonged to another world, rough, hardened, and uninterested in anything beyond their drinks. Vanessa pushed open the door and stepped inside, the scent of stale beer and cigarette smoke clawing at her senses. Thomas was already there, seated at a corner table with his back to the wall. His eyes tracked her every move as she approached, his expression unreadable. "You weren't followed, were you?" he asked, his voice low. "No," Vanessa replied. "And if I was, they're about to regret it." Thomas smirked, but the amusement didn't reach his eyes. "I like the fire. You're going to need it." She slid into the seat across from him, her posture tense but controlled. "What's the update?" "Bad news. Morrison knows you're coming for him," Thomas said bluntly. "He's already trying to smear your name. Claims of misconduct, shady dealings. He's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks." Vanessa's jaw tightened, Let him try. I've built my reputation on integrity. If he wants a war of public opinion, I'll give him one. There's more." Thomas glanced around the room before lowering his voice. "Morrison's not just trying to discredit you. He's put a bounty on your head." The words hit Vanessa like a punch to the gut. But she didn't flinch. "How much?" "Enough to make even decent men reconsider their morals. You need to be careful, Vanessa. You can't trust anyone." "I trust you." Thomas's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place. Guilt? Worry? Whatever it was, he masked it quickly. "I hope that's true. Because if you go down, Morrison wins, and a lot of innocent people will keep suffering." "Then I won't go down." "Good, because I have something that might help." Thomas slid a folder across the table. "Testimonies. From people Morrison thought he silenced. It's not enough to bring him down on its own, but it's a start." Vanessa opened the folder, her gaze skimming the pages. Names, dates, places, stories of betrayal and brutality. Morrison's victims were numerous, but their voices had been silenced by fear and desperation. "Can you get me more of these?" Vanessa asked, her eyes burning with determination. "I'll do what I can, but Morrison's got eyes everywhere. Be ready for anything." "I am." As Vanessa left the bar, her fingers clenched around the folder like a lifeline. Her war against Morrison had officially begun, and she was ready to fight until the very end. The following weeks were a calculated descent into the depths of Morrison's empire. Vanessa moved like a ghost, slipping through the cracks of the system he thought he controlled. She switched apartments every 3 days, used burner phones, and only communicated with Thomas through encrypted channels. Her old life was a memory, one she had buried under layers of strategy and survival. Every morning, Vanessa pored over the testimonies Thomas provided, highlighting connections and cross-referencing them with Morrison's financial transactions. The man had his claws in everything: real estate, narcotics, human trafficking, illegal gambling rings, and worst of all, his protection racket funneled money into the pockets of corrupted officers who were supposed to uphold the law. But Vanessa's determination was greater than Morrison's greed. She assembled her evidence into a cohesive, damning narrative. Still, she knew that documents alone wouldn't be enough to take him down. She needed witnesses, real people willing to come forward and testify, regardless of the dangers. The search led her to people who had been broken and discarded by Morrison's network. Young women lured into his traps with promises of jobs only to find themselves trafficked and silenced. Families whose loved ones had been framed or conveniently disappeared by dirty cops doing Morrison's bidding. The stories were haunting, but they only fueled Vanessa's desire for justice. Vanessa's latest informant was a woman named Keisha, a single mother who had lost her brother to a crooked cop tied to Morrison's crew. Keisha's brother had been a social worker who'd stumbled upon Morrison's trafficking network and tried to expose it. A week later, he was found dead in an alley, his death written off as a gang-related incident. "People like him don't just die like that," Keisha said, her voice trembling as she clutched a photo of her brother. "He was good. He wanted to help people, and they killed him for it. They tried to make me believe he was just another statistic, but I know the truth, and I want them to pay. I'm going to make sure they do," Vanessa promised. "But I need your help, Keisha. I need you to testify when the time comes. Your story is important, and it can make a difference." Keisha's eyes glistened with unused tears. "You think one voice is enough to go up against all of them? They'll come for me and my son, and I can't lose him too. I understand, but I won't leave you unprotected. When the time comes, you'll be under federal protection. No one will be able to touch you or your son. And if you fail, what then?" Vanessa didn't hesitate. "Then I'll die trying. But I don't fail." Keisha searched Vanessa's eyes for a long moment before nodding slowly. "All right, I'll do it. For my brother, and for everyone else they've hurt." The desperation and resilience Vanessa encountered in her interviews shook her to the core. But it also made her stronger. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every soul who had been crushed beneath Morrison's iron fist. But Morrison wasn't sitting idly by. The closer Vanessa got to unraveling his network, the more aggressive his retaliation became. The first attempt on her life came when she was driving home from a late-night meeting with Thomas. A black SUV tailed her for miles before ramming into her rear bumper, sending her car spinning off the road. Vanessa's instincts kicked in, her training saving her life as she rolled from the vehicle and disappeared into the shadows of the night. The second attempt was more sophisticated. A package arrived at her apartment with no return address. Her paranoia had become her ally, and she scanned it for explosives before opening it. Inside was a photograph of her mother's gravestone with a blood-red X scrawled across it. Morrison was sending a message, and Vanessa received it loud and clear. But the message only solidified her resolve. If Morrison was that desperate to silence her, it meant she was getting close. Too close. The game escalated when Vanessa received a call from Thomas that sent ice through her veins. "They got to me," he said, his voice a broken rasp. "I barely made it out. They raided my apartment, took my files. Everything we've been building. It's gone." "Tell me you made copies," Vanessa pleaded, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the phone. "Of course, I'm not stupid, but Morrison's people are everywhere. I can't stay in the city. If I do, I'm dead." "Where are you now?" "On the move. Don't worry about me. Worry about yourself. Morrison's gunning for you hard, Vanessa. This isn't just about stopping you. He wants to make an example out of you. Then I'll make an example out of him first." There was a long pause before Thomas spoke again, his voice trembling with fear and admiration. "You really are fearless, aren't you?" "Not fearless," Vanessa replied. "Just tired of letting monsters like Morrison walk free." "Be careful," Thomas warned. "He's more dangerous than you realize." Vanessa hung up the phone and stared at the files sprawled across her table. Her network of witnesses was growing, but it wasn't enough. Morrison was a giant, and she was nothing but a pebble in his path. But she was a pebble that refused to be crushed. Vanessa contacted Keisha and the other survivors, arranging for them to be moved to safe houses across the city. She couldn't afford to lose a single witness, not when their stories were the key to taking down Morrison's empire. Sleep was a luxury Vanessa couldn't afford. Every waking moment was devoted to solidifying her case. Thomas had been her only ally, but his absence left her more isolated than ever. And that's when Morrison made his boldest move yet. The hitman came at dawn, kicking down the door of her latest safe house with a ferocity that shook the building. Vanessa barely had time to grab her weapon before bullets tore through the walls like angry wasps. She returned fire, her aim steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. She moved like liquid shadow, every step calculated, every shot deliberate. But they just kept coming. The firefight was relentless, an unending barrage of violence that tested every fiber of Vanessa's survival instincts. Her body moved faster than her thoughts, muscle memory guiding her as she dodged bullets and returned fire. The air was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder, plaster dust swirling from shattered walls. Two gunmen lay dead in the hallway, their bodies twisted in the unnatural stillness of death. But Vanessa had no time to dwell on the lives she had taken in self-defense. More were coming, and the echoes of heavy boots stomping up the stairwell warned her of their approach. Her apartment was compromised. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. Morrison's reach was longer than she had anticipated, his resources seemingly endless. The man had unleashed his wolves, and they would not stop until they had torn her apart. She moved quickly, gathering her files, phones, and weapons. Her laptop was already destroyed, smashed to pieces, before she even considered leaving it behind. But the external hard drive, the one with every piece of evidence she had painstakingly compiled, was strapped to her waist, a lifeline she couldn't afford to lose. Smoke curled through the air from a nearby grenade blast, the concussive force still ringing in her ears. Vanessa pressed her back against the kitchen counter, her breathing shallow but controlled. Her hands shook, but her resolve did not. 3 more gunmen. Their silhouettes loomed outside the apartment door, flashlights spotting like ghosts in the darkness. She steadied her grip on her weapon, her fingers caressing the cool steel like an old friend. The first man breached the door, his shout cut short by the bullet Vanessa drove into his chest. He collapsed in a heap, his assault rifle clattering to the floor. The second man followed, but Vanessa anticipated his movement, dropping him with a shot to the leg and another to the throat. But the third man was smarter. He didn't charge blindly like his predecessors. Instead, he crept along the edge of the living room, his steps cautious, his eyes sweeping every shadow. Vanessa could respect his professionalism, even as she prepared to end him. She fired just as he did, their shots ringing out in unison. Pain tore through her left arm, the searing burn of a bullet slicing through muscle and skin. But her own shot had found its mark, catching him cleanly between the eyes. For a moment, Vanessa slumped against the counter, her breath ragged, blood trickling from her wound. The pain was sharp, real, but she had endured worse. Her training had conditioned her to push beyond pain, to treat it as nothing more than an inconvenience. But this was more than pain. This was war. She tore a strip of fabric from her shirt and tied it around her arm to slow the bleeding. Her mind raced through options, each one more desperate than the last. Staying here was suicide. Morrison's men would return, and next time, they would bring more firepower. Vanessa stumbled out of the apartment, her every sense on high alert. The stairwell was a risk, but the fire escape was too exposed. She opted for the stairs, her feet pounding against the concrete as she descended with ruthless efficiency. Outside, the city was just beginning to stir, early morning commuters blissfully unaware of the carnage that had unfolded mere feet away. Vanessa ducked into an alley, her eyes scanning every face, every shadow. Paranoia had become her closest ally. She made her way to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town, paying in cash and slipping into the dingy room like a wounded animal seeking shelter. As she cleaned her wound with shaking hands, her phone vibrated with an incoming message. Thomas. His voice was strained, even through the distorted line. "They're on a rampage, Vanessa. Morrison's people are targeting everyone you've spoken to. Keisha's in hiding, but her son, they took him." Vanessa's stomach twisted with rage. They took her son. They're sending a message. Anyone who helped you is a target, and they won't stop until you're dead or they've destroyed everyone connected to you. "They made a mistake," Vanessa growled. "They pushed me too far." "Vanessa, listen to me. You need to lay low. This isn't just Morrison anymore. His network is unraveling, and he's desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. Desperation isn't my problem. It's his." Thomas sighed, the sound of someone who had lost too much to hope. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done from the start. I'm taking the fight to him. No more running. No more hiding." "Vanessa, that's suicide." "Maybe, but it's also justice." She hung up before Thomas could argue. The rage burning within her was both blinding and clarifying. Morrison's arrogance had pushed him to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. He thought his power made him untouchable, that his wealth shielded him from accountability. But Vanessa had built her career on tearing down men like him. And this time, she wasn't going to stop until he was nothing but a name scrawled on a prison register. The first step was getting Keisha's son back. The second was dismantling everything Morrison held dear. Vanessa made her preparations with methodical precision. She couldn't rely on the Bureau's resources anymore, not with Morrison's people contaminating every level of law enforcement. But she still had her skills, her connections, and her sheer determination. Her arm throbbed with pain, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins dulled it to a distant ache. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number she had saved for emergencies only. "Yeah." The voice on the other end was gruff, suspicious. "It's Vanessa Knight. I need a favor, a big one." The man hesitated, You've got some nerve calling me after all this time. Do you want to hold a grudge, or do you want to get even with the man who left your brother rotting in a cell for 10 years? There was a long pause. Where do you need me? Vanessa exhaled, her chest heaving with the force of her conviction. Meet me at the old train station in 2 hours. And bring everything you've got. The line went dead, but her resolve only sharpened. If Morrison wanted a war, she would give him one. The old train station stood as a relic of forgotten history, its crumbling architecture cloaked in shadow and neglect. The city's pulse beat faintly in the distance, the hum of traffic swallowed by the thick fog rolling through the cracked windows and rusted beams. Vanessa crouched behind a shattered pillar, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. She had arrived an hour early, her paranoia refusing to allow for any margin of error. The wound in her arm ached, but she forced herself to ignore the throbbing pain. She patched it up as best she could, the makeshift bandage holding for now. But there was no denying the blood loss had taken its toll. Her body felt heavy, her limbs dulled by fatigue. But her mind was sharp, crystal clear. The only thing anchoring her to consciousness was the burning hunger for justice. When he finally emerged from the shadows, Vanessa's fingers tightened around the grip of her gun. But the man before her wasn't a threat. Not to her. Thought you might not show, Vanessa said, her voice steady despite the weariness etched into her bones. The man grunted, his face partially concealed beneath the brim of a worn baseball cap. His build was powerful, shoulders broad, and solid like a stone wall. He was the kind of man who carried violence in his veins, though his eyes spoke of wisdom earned through loss. "You're lucky I'm here at all," he replied. "Name's Carter. Heard a lot about you, Knight. Not all of it good. Good isn't what I'm aiming for." Carter's lips twitched into something resembling a smile. "Fair enough. You're in deep, lady. Word on the street is Morrison's put a bounty on your head so high, people are lining up for miles just to take a shot. Let them try." Carter shook his head. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the dumbest. Maybe both." Vanessa looked him over, her gaze sharp and assessing. "You said you could help me." "I said I'd consider it. Now that I see the shape you're in, I'm not so sure. You're half dead, but still alive," she countered, "which is more than I can say for the guys Morrison sent after me." "Point taken." Carter crossed his arms, the muscles in his forearms rippling with barely contained power. "What exactly do you need from me?" "Keisha's son. They took him to make her talk. We get him back, I get what I need from her, and then we go after Morrison." Carter's expression hardened. "And you expect me to just throw myself into that mess because—" "What?" "You're the good guy. Because Morrison put your brother away on false charges and made sure he'd never see the light of day again. Because he's doing it to hundreds of innocent people, and he's laughing all the way to the bank." Carter's jaw clenched. His fists tightened at his sides. "I've been fighting this fight alone for too damn long," Vanessa continued. "But with your help, we can tear Morrison's empire down. For good." Silence stretched between them, thick with hesitation and old wounds. Finally, Carter nodded. "Fine, I'll help you. But I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. This is about revenge. And if you get yourself killed before we finish the job, I'll take that personal." "Understood." Vanessa straightened, her vision swimming from the effort. "We need to move fast. Keisha's son is their bait. They'll kill him if they think she's not cooperating. Then we don't give them a chance." Carter's gaze was fierce, his purpose now as tangible as her own. Vanessa laid out her plan, her words sharp and efficient. They would hit Morrison's safe house from 2 angles. Carter on the ground, Vanessa providing cover from a rooftop across the street. It was a high-risk operation with too many variables to count. But hesitation was a luxury neither of them could afford. The drive to the safe house was silent, the air between them heavy with unspoken fears and unyielding determination. Carter drove like a man possessed, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Vanessa kept her eyes trained on the street, her senses sharp despite the exhaustion clawing at her. They reached the drop-off point, the city lights painting the sky with a sickly orange glow. Carter killed the engine, his gaze locking onto hers. "You sure about this?" "More sure than I've ever been." He nodded once before slipping into the shadows, his form merging with the darkness like he was born from it. Vanessa climbed the fire escape of the adjacent building, her wounded arm protesting every movement. From her vantage point, she could see the safe house clearly. Guards patrolled the perimeter with military precision, their weapons glinting beneath the moonlight. Carter's voice crackled over her earpiece. "I'm in position. Ready when you are." Vanessa steadied her breathing, her fingers curling around the trigger of her sniper rifle. "Let's do this." The assault was pure chaos. Vanessa's shots cut down guards with deadly precision, her bullets slicing through the night like vengeful comets. Carter tore through the safe house like a force of nature, his fists and bullets delivering punishment with equal ferocity. Within minutes, the compound was a graveyard of shattered bodies and spilled blood. Carter emerged from the wreckage carrying a small, terrified boy in his arms. His expression was grim, but victorious. "We got him," Carter panted. "He's alive." Relief washed over Vanessa like a tidal wave. But it was only the beginning. Morrison's empire was still intact, his power still reaching into every corner of the city. But now, Vanessa had allies, and nothing would stop her from finishing what she started.